Hey, I'm Steph, and I am going to talk to you today about teaching. Specifically, I'm going to talk about teaching coding, data science, and building a community. And what I mean by that is, how do you train new people? How do you train juniors? What benefits does teaching and training give your existing staff in your business? And I'm also going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is how can you teach and train people at a high level when we're all remote? So that's going to be what I'm talking about today. My contact details are on the first slide as well, so you can get in touch if you have any questions. And this is sort of an overview of what I'm going to talk about in this session. So I'm going to have three different sections. The first is what should we teach? What should we teach to newbies or those people coming into the industry and those people coming into our companies? What can we do to make sure everyone has a strong start? I'm also going to talk about how should we teach? What's the best way to teach people the data skills and coding skills that they need so they actually stick? And then finally, we're going to finish off with why should we teach? This is probably the most important one. Clearly, teaching has benefits for juniors and newbies, but what's in it for businesses and the senior staff? Why should we help those in our communities and companies that are already there, retrain and upskill? So I suppose a good place to start is why do I feel like I can talk about this? This is just a little bit about me, a sort of general timeline of my career. So I actually left school quite early. I took a bunch of gap years in that I just didn't really do much. I worked, I had different jobs, I worked overseas, and I wrote faffing because that's really what I did. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left school. I don't have one of these inspirational stories about how data was always, what I wanted to do. I genuinely didn't have any idea what I was going to do. And, I had a bunch of gap years. I was actually living overseas, and then I realized that I needed to come back and do something. I was making, a choice not to go to university at that point, but I realized that I had the privilege of being able to go to university for free, so I should probably do that. So I came back to Scotland and applied to do a psychology degree. Not necessarily because I was super interested in it. I just didn't know what else to do. It seemed quite a broad degree. So I did that, and I definitely didn't apply to that thinking data. But once I got there, I realized that actually the experimental parts of psychology, collecting data on human beings, analyzing it, reporting it, that was the part I really, really liked about it. So that gave me some inkling that maybe something to do with data was going to be for me. But I got to the end of that degree, and again, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And someone at the uni said to me, have you thought about doing a PhD? And I genuinely hadn't. I didn't know what a PhD was, really. I didn't think you could do one straight after doing an undergrad, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't really know, but I did like doing what I was doing. So I applied for the funding thinking, if I don't get it, I'll do something else. But I did get it. I got into a really good program that was 4 years. The first year was training. You could do different lab placements, and you did an industry placement, and then you did your PhD. So that was really key for me there. That's where I learned to code as well. I had a supervisor in my PhD that said, if you don't learn to code, you will be considered illiterate. And I'd done, SPSS, Minitab, Excel when I was doing my undergrad, but I'd never actually coded. So it was there that I learned MATLAB. That was the first language I learned. And it's where I realized how much I enjoyed programming and how much I enjoyed analyzing data. And it's also during my PhD where I started teaching. And I started doing it for some money at the side, but I actually realized I really, really liked it. And I did my PhD at Glasgow, and by then they'd shifted all their undergrad programs to R. So I could actually teach programming as part of my PhD, and it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. And so after my PhD, again, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I enjoyed analysing data. So I started applying for jobs in industry. I knew I didn't want to stay in academia. It wasn't for me. And I got a job as a data analyst, but it was called a statistical programmer at a pharmaceutical company in Edinburgh, actually. So I moved over there, started working there, and did that. And again, I was there for a while. I got promoted a couple of times. And even there, I started, teaching more junior staff as well, because I really did like teaching. But after a couple of years, I realized, I need something new. And I started freelancing, and the freelancing was how I ended up at CodeClan. And that's where I am now, still. Now, if you don't know about CodeClan is a place that teaches programming bootcamps. We've got a software development one and we've got a data analysis one. I wrote some of the data analysis one and I teach on that one and all the data short courses there. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm sort of doing this sort of hybrid teaching and technical role, which I love, you know, and all throughout this, teaching, coding and data analysis has been a really large part of my life since 2013. You know, I've taught it at university, I've taught it in industry to junior staff, and now I'm a full-time bootcamp instructor. So reasonably qualified to talk about why it's important to train people in technical skills. And that's what we're going to talk about first. The first part of the talk is, well, okay, what should we teach to people? Okay. And I will say that when I'm talking about teaching, I teach on a bootcamp, which is, you know, for career changers, people wanting to break into the industry. But all of this applies as well to people that are coming into your company. What you should be training people as they come in, you know, with the idea that if you invest time in them, they'll stay at your company. So even though it's sort of me teaching at a bootcamp right now, it is applicable to lots of different places. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So this slide's got a lot of stuff on it. It's just the technical stuff that I'm going to start with. I mean it quite generally when I say there are endless possibilities that you can teach. Like literally, tech changes so much, you could keep teaching forever. This is just what I think is probably useful. It doesn't mean it's the be all and end all, but it's what I teach right now as well. So we'll start with the obvious, which is the programming languages. I think everyone listening to this already agrees that for data science, you need to know how to code, and that SQL and Python and R are sort of the standard ones you see everywhere. In my experience, R tends to be more public sector, Python tends to be more startup, and SQL tends to be everywhere. So if you're going for one, I'd probably say SQL. I love it, it's used everywhere. The fundamentals of SQL are really built into the toolboxes used most often in R and Python, like tidyverse and pandas. Python and R for me personally are a toss-up. I don't think it matters. I love R with all my being, but I do know Python. But to me, really, you can do the fundamentals of data analysis in both. And it really doesn't matter at this point what you use, apart from depends what your company uses. R's come on so much in the last 7 years that I've been using it. And same with Python. Like, it just, to me, doesn't really matter too much. This R versus Python thing you see quite a lot, doesn't matter. They're both just tools. For me, it's much more important to have a really good core understanding of data principles, you know, data cleaning, data wrangling, text manipulation, joining, quality control. To me, that's what's important, not the language or the tool that you do them in. I think those are the key. I would say probably SQL is the one that I would recommend the most. In terms of visualization, I put these together. You know, again, I'd say programming is always better in this case. R's got this ggplot library, which is fantastic. Python's got Seaborn, and I would say do them. But again, I'm going to stress that it doesn't really matter what you do them in. It's really the key thing you should focus on teaching people are the fundamentals of what makes a good visualization, what should you do and what shouldn't you do, what's the right chart to use for certain data, how do you communicate clearly what you're trying to get across in a plot. You know, those are really key to me rather than the tool you use. And I've got Power BI and Tableau in here. Again, these are a total toss-up for me. I've not used Power BI, but I've used Tableau. It's pretty easy to learn. From what I've heard, they both do similar things. And again, it's just about the fundamentals I think are really important. I put Excel on here because I really do think that's an undervalued skill. I am not great at Excel. I don't really use it. I have used it in the past. And the reason I put it on here is a lot of companies use it, and you'll work with people that use it. Non-data roles use it everywhere. And there's also a lot of companies that don't have people that are like skilled in coding, and they'll use Excel. So it is good to be able to work with it. It's great for certain jobs. And I think I've put it on here because I think there's a tendency to ignore some of these tools because they're not coding in the data science community. But, you know, being judgy about certain tools doesn't help anyone. You know, if you're good at Excel, I think it is a benefit. So that's why I put it on. And I've put some of the more niche things on here as well, I suppose. I put GitHub because that's what I use. It's what we teach. But I think any sort of version control is really important to teach. GitHub's just the main one. And I also think that project management, especially now, is a really useful thing to teach data scientists, because you will be working in teams. And it is a slightly different environment than people are used to. So Agile is obviously the key one that you'd want to teach. But again, I think these are just things, it doesn't matter so much as long as you're aware of the fundamentals. You know, you need to work with people when you're working in data, and you need to have reproducible output, and you need to have something that people can check. So that's what I've put them on. And then finally, we've got the big data, cloud computing, all that stuff. Again, I don't really think there's a key one to know that. This may be controversial. I think it's much more important to have an awareness of how cloud storage works, of how big data works, understand how to work with computing clusters, you know, rather than get hung up on which technique to use. The core concepts are really key for me. And that's probably an overarching theme in what I'm talking about is tools, yes, know them, but actually having a fundamental understanding is way more important. And then we've got the sort of softer tech skills in a way. But what I mean by this is people understand that you need soft skills to work in data, but actually there's a bunch of skills that are really hard to learn when you're not working. And I think it's really important to recognize this when you're hiring and when you're training, because you won't have people that come in knowing all of these things, all the sort of softer side of tech, unless they're very experienced. And these are the things that I think sometimes fall under the radar when designing training programs. That's why we put them in our training programs, because they are really important. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just the ones that, you know, I think are quite key. So sort of starting at the top, we've got ethics. I think this is really lacking in a lot of data courses and a lot of onboarding programs that I've seen. Is you need to really be aware of the ethics behind what you're doing in order to work well. You know, teach people why you're collecting the data. Why are you analyzing it that way? Who's going to benefit from it? What's going to come of it? You know, make them feel responsible for it, because if something comes up that is sort of in an ethical grey area, then they'll be aware of it and it will have a little red flag. And that, you know, it's just so good to teach people ethical ways of working if you can. And it's something that gets missed a lot. So I think it's really key. I've put documentation and reproducibility. Talked a little bit about this when I was talking about GitHub, but I think these two go hand in hand. You know, learning how to write good documentation is really difficult. It's not something that you would usually do when you're just in a course, or unless you're a senior. Actually, you know, my old job, it wasn't until I was a senior programmer that I got involved in documentation, because it's important and it takes experience to do it. But I think some intro into writing good documentation is really, really key, just to even be aware that this thing exists, you know. And learning how to write good, reproducible code that can be checked is really an understatement. So I think that is really, really, really key to include in any training programs. I've put interpretability, client culture, and communication. Again, I think this is really difficult if you've not worked anywhere, or even if you're just coming from a different company into a new company. I think this is really hard sort of to figure out, and it should be part of the onboarding process and the training process. You know, the data that you're working with, how do you usually communicate it to people? Do you have to usually explain it to non-technical people as well as technical people? How do you deal with clients that want something, but you have to tell them that it doesn't work that way, or that you can't do it? How's the process about dealing with what the client's goals and successes are? How do you communicate failure to them? How best do you measure what's good and bad each day? You know, these things that are all key to a business are really difficult to get experience with. So the more we fold this into the onboarding process or the training process, the better, in my opinion. So I put them together. The other one is flexibility. Now, this is really key for me. I think one of the hardest lessons for newbies to learn is that there usually isn't a correct answer in an analysis, only a more defensible one. And you actually really need to be flexible, not dogmatic in how you do your analysis. You have to be willing to change and work in different ways. And I think, again, switching between companies is quite difficult because people do things different ways. And the people that really thrive are the people that have learned already that flexibility is a really good thing to have. So I think, trying to stress this when you're training and onboarding people is really important. And then the last little trio that I've put is, reviewing, production and testing. There's a really big difference between coding models for a tutorial and coding models for yourself. There's a big difference between that and like building robust workflows that people can actually use in the workplace, that you can, test, that you can scale, that you can put into production. I think those are really key to actually involve in the training process, because it's something you don't get experience of. I've written loads of models as part of my teaching, but I've never put one into production, so I would need, even as a senior, training in how to do that. So these are the kind of other complementary skills that I put in. There's obviously loads and loads and loads of soft skills that are across the board important: communication, teamwork, resilience, all that stuff. I'm not going to talk about that because I just want to talk about the ones that you build really into training programs. Soft skills tend to come, with people as they come in. So that's, kind of what I'm talking about in terms of training. And I appreciate that that's a lot. And it sounds really broad. And that I've done that on purpose because I truly believe that having a bunch of super specialized people is not actually maintainable or actually very achievable. The field is way too big to be an expert in everything. Sometimes even just keeping up with with like new packages that are coming out is difficult because there's so many. So I do think that having a broad perspective is usually best. Training people in a broad perspective is usually best, because if you know the fundamentals, if you know the fundamentals and tools well in a broad way, you're going to be able to solve a bigger range of problems. You're going to be able to work in different industries, and it's going to let you be flexible and change as tech changes around you. And I do think, that's a good thing to look for when you're hiring people, and it's a good thing to build into your training programs, that you're not expecting everyone to be specialists in everything, okay? Sometimes there's calls for that, and people will come in with strengths in one or the other. You shouldn't ignore that. But I think that understanding of, you can't know everything is really important. And I do think building a team of these T-shaped people is really key. And this is not new. This is just me agreeing with what everyone is saying out there. It makes it easier for a company to have these people. It makes scheduling easier if you've got a bunch of people that can do everything rather than one person that can do it. If they're off for 2 weeks, you can't get anything done, So that's the idea, is if you only have specialists, you're going to have a hard time when they're not there or if they leave. Let people learn more, not less. And I'll sort of finish this section by saying, I think sometimes when you're thinking about what you want to teach people, what you want to train people coming into your company in, is that, what you want people to know is often very different than what they actually need to know, okay? Don't teach complex things because you know it. What do they need to know? Okay, teach the pool, not the ocean, and let them know it's okay not to know everything. I think even though I've put a lot of stuff here, I've not said that you need to be great in all of it. All I'm saying is know the fundamentals well, and you will be able to take those skills and go anywhere. And I think that's really key for training. Cool, right. So what we teach is done. Now on to how should we teach. I've been teaching for a long time in a lot of different ways. I am a big proponent of live demos. This is just an example from one of our classes. They really are so beneficial to people learning to code. It doesn't just apply to students, it applies all training, okay? And you can see here what I'm doing. I've got questions typed out, I've got the code typed out, they're coding along with me. I'm making loads and loads of mistakes, as I go. I can't type the word start properly, but that is the key. I am there showing them what it's actually like when you're programming, okay? And I think that is really it. You get people to code along with you, and they're going to see that you don't have to be perfect, okay? And I actually really like this. My old organization did this as well, where, when you got onboarded, you got paired up and you'd sit with a programmer and watch them code, and then they'd give you some tutorials and you go away with, okay? Now, this is sort of a summary of the benefits I see about live coding, okay? So it gives hands-on coding experience to learners. Talking is better than doing, okay? People retain information when they do it rather than when they listen to it, okay? And if you're getting them coding along with you, they're building up all the muscle memory they need for coding, they're getting faster, okay? And also, if you're coding with them it shows you make mistakes too. You know, I have genuinely met people that think that senior programmers make no mistakes. But for me, it's very much, you know, senior programmers don't necessarily make less mistakes overall. They just know how to fix them quicker. And it just, if you're live coding and they're watching you, you know, it shows them that it's totally okay not to know something. It's totally okay to mess up, because that is genuinely what happens. And by doing this, you create this safe space to fail. And what I mean by that is if you're training people and they know that it's fine to make a mistake, and they know they can come to you and be like, oh, I made this, can you fix it? And they know that you'll have made that mistake at some point. Things move faster, right? You don't want a bunch of people that you're training to not want to come and admit that they can't get something to work, because they'll sit there for days and days will pass and nothing will get done. Or they'll eventually come to you and say, I can't figure it out. And you figure it out in 10 minutes. You know, you can save all that time just by making this really safe culture. And I think actually just people watching you do your job really does foster that. The other things that I've put on is it teaches the how and why, not just the syntax. So you could see in that video before, I was writing questions there and I was coding along and I was actually talking through what I was doing. So I was saying, oh, okay, so the question's asking this. We want to find employees that are doing this. So this is why I'm writing this code. And I think that's really important, because if you just teach syntax, they're never going to be able to go off on their own and think through a question. So getting juniors and trainees to watch what people are doing is hugely beneficial for ways you don't even really realize until after. And then the final one is interactivity leads to questions, which you Google. And by that, I mean me, the person programming, Googles the question, because I don't know the answer to every question, but Google does. And for that, the good thing about that is it really emphasizes that it's not important to memorize everything. I mean, it's completely impossible to memorize everything. I always say when I'm teaching, I can't do this without Google. And if a student asks me a question I don't know, I say, oh, let's just Google. And I just open Google and we do it together. So they can see the process of how to learn and how to find the answers they need. And again, this just benefits your organization. If you think about it, if you're training people and you have a workforce that's totally fine coming, asking for help, they can find answers on their own. They don't have to wait to, a senior to have a meeting with them to help. Work moves faster. People don't sit stressing about things for ages. They just keep going and they keep learning. And it's really, really efficient. And you can do everything in this manner. I was teaching SQL there in the video. This is me. I was teaching R. We were learning about testing, like unit testing, how to do tests on your codes and your functions. I've taught Python with Jupyter Notebooks here. We're learning Python basics. And doing it so that they can see a reproducible document. I've taught command line and GitHub, everything there. Again, I just show them what I'm doing. You can see I'm CD and LSing there everywhere, just step by step. Because again, when we teach this stuff, I think people think, oh, they know how to write it all like completely, professionally. It's not. Everyone that's used command line is constantly doing CD, LS everywhere. And that's just something they should get used to. And it doesn't even need to be code, it can be good practice. So this is us drawing out Shiny Dashboards apps and talking about how to plan them. Let's get together and plan these apps. And we use like whiteboarding tools. This one's Excalidraw, it's really good. And I can show them how I would do it if I was starting from scratch, building a dashboard app. And then the final thing I've put in, and this came to me actually really recently, is like projects. If you're thinking about how to do training and how to teach data science and coding, I can't stress projects enough. I've just put up a screenshot of my GitHub, mostly because I didn't want to put any of the students up. But, tutorials are great. They're a good way to learn, but eventually you need to move on to doing. So what we tend to do is we do like this sort of I do, we do, you do style. So I will do some live coding with them. They code along. They do projects together. They do group work. They do homeworks and we talk about it. But then they do projects on their own. And the CodeCon course, I think we do 4. But the idea is that you need to sort of start from scratch at some point and you need to get doing projects. We've got them on GitHub so you can show them off, but really it doesn't matter. You just need to give a project to people you're training. And again, my old company did this before where I had my training, I went on an external course. I came back, I worked with one of the senior programmers a little bit, but then they gave me a study of my own, which was actually just a study that they'd completed in the pharmaceutical company a few years before. It was relatively easy, but I could start from scratch with all the templates and the sort of fake analysis plan and do something from start to finish. And you learn so much by doing and failing in that way. So I can't stress enough that projects are such a good way to consolidate. And that brings me on to the final part, which is the most important part, I think, as well, is why should we teach? Okay, why should we train? Why should we do this? And when I say we, what I mean is, why should we as senior analysis people or companies, why should we invest in training new people or the current staff when we can just, you know, put out a job ad and hire someone, okay? So I'm going to split it into what's in it for the juniors, what's in it for the seniors. I just split it into two. Hopefully it's more broad. But I'll start with the juniors. You know, why should we teach juniors? And I think right now, especially, there seems to be this huge demand out there for seniors. They're already trained and there's less of a desire to hire juniors. And I do get it. We're in a pandemic. Money is tight. It's easier to hire someone who knows a lot of stuff that can just get going than it is to train a few people. I do get that, but we will definitely get to a point where you need to train people. If seniors are so in demand right now, they will move companies more easily, and I think that people have seen this, that senior people are taking different roles. So it does help to start thinking about, you know, how can you start to implement things in your business that will train up a really great set of people that will stay with you, okay? And also I want to talk about the benefits that come along with training up new or existing employees. So these are some of the ones that I see, okay? You have a chance here to set people up for success, okay? Coding isn't necessarily a difficult skill to learn. Like, I do truly believe that anyone who wants to learn can, given the time and opportunity. But the way that people are set up for success is an entirely different story, and everyone has a chance to change that. So for me, this is what you get if you take on training juniors or people in your organization. You get the unique opportunity to train them in how your organization works, okay? I heard this from other people before, is that seniors come in and they've worked somewhere else for a really long time and they're great, but they've got habits that come from that old place, and, you know, their company teaches slightly differently. Breaking habits is a lot harder than just gaining habits, okay? So if you take in people that you're going to nurture, you can show them how your organization works and set them up for success, okay? You can show them that it's not about being perfect. You don't want them to know everything. You want to teach them how to learn, okay? That is really key, I think, and what it is, why we should teach juniors is if you teach people how to learn, they will be able to go off and solve problems by themselves. And I've already talked about how if you do that, like, see that Googling is the best option, be okay with failure and mistakes, you're going to have a workforce that can work quite fast and can respond to how quickly tech changes. So you're really setting people up to do a good job if you take on training. I took this screenshot from Twitter because I think it's really, really good. Her handle's there as well. And this just is like the key point, like, even senior staff need to learn, okay? But if you take on training juniors, you want to have a workforce that knows you support their learning. Technical people do leave roles to go and learn new things. It happens all the time. One of the most consistent things we hear about people job switching is, well, I wanted to use a different tech and I wasn't learning anything new and I got a bit bored, so I wanted to go. You know, people change for money and opportunity all the time, but really a lot of it is learning, okay? I hear this in tech. So if you create this community of learning early on, you do stand in good stead for having a longer lasting workforce. If you invest in showing juniors that you love that they like to learn, you'll get to keep the highly motivated, engaged people when they do progress. And I've sort of summed it up here, is that people rarely want to leave jobs where they learn, grow and thrive. Yes, people leave for different opportunities. It doesn't mean that you don't need to promote people if they're doing a good job and stuff. You can't just always fall on learning. But if you invest in people and build them up, you will set them up for success. And we all know it's much easier to keep people than hire new people. So I really, really think that if you invest in the junior level, even the senior staff will see you're serious about teaching. And that's really, really key for a business. Now, I said I was going to talk about the elephant in the room, and this seems like a good place to do when I'm talking about training juniors, is training while remote, okay? And what we've heard is, we're in a pandemic, companies aren't hiring juniors, and that's for a bunch of different reasons. Money is tight and stuff, but one of the ones that I've heard quite a lot is that they think onboarding is harder when we're remote. Now, I would definitely argue that it's not harder. It's a bit stranger and it's a bit different, but it's not harder. It is totally doable if you invest. And when I say invest, I mean time and resources. And I will say this is no different than if you were onboarding people face to face. This applies for both, okay? So this is what I've sort of said is key when you're thinking about training juniors remotely, okay? It's really important you get the right people and make it work. This applies to both in person and remote, so I see no difference there. I'll talk a little bit about how you do it in a second, but these are the key things. Like, you need to hire people with high motivation to learn, because if they don't, then this whole process is not going to work, okay? Most technical people do. They have huge desires to learn the new tech. It's exciting. So it's not one that you might have an issue with, but you do need to be careful when you're doing remote training that you have these people that are invested, okay? You need to move organizational resources to support the teams. A lot of the time, onboarding falls to a manager or someone that's already got a lot of stuff on their plate. And that's not necessarily the best way to do it. What should really be happening is you assign a dedicated mentor that's going to teach this person. And that's how it works. You need to give them some space and time to do it. Training is incredibly time consuming, but if you do it well, you can just do it once, for that person. And then those people can then go on to train new people. That's the idea. If you have a really good teaching experience, you're teaching these new recruits how to teach other people, and it will pay off. The key one I've put in as well is give the mentor credit for it. I think a lot of the time it just falls to, it's part of it. It's not, you should be making it something that's really good for promotion. So much of promotion relies now on you're promoted if you'll manage people. Some companies don't do that, which is good. There's the individual contribution one. If you're very technical, we'll promote you as well. If you like development, we'll promote you. If you like management, we'll promote you. That idea of finding a niche is really important, but you really need to give people credit for training, because they are doing you a service by training new employees that are going to help your business. And then some other tips, balance paired tasks like the mentor and mentee, balance that with projects that you give them and solo work. If you're taking on more than one junior, you can put them together in a group and get them to work together. And that is really, really beneficial. So they're not alone while remote. And then the other one is make sure they're involved in daily stand-up. So it is hard being remote if you're not speaking to people. We have stand-ups every morning at 9, so we just talk, quick 10-minute chat. How are you doing? What do you need? That really helps, and it helps people feel included. Again, I think all this applies when you're remote or not, but if you're doing it remote, what I've found, so I've used everything, Slack, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, WebEx over the last year. The key thing, it doesn't hugely matter which one. I use Slack and Zoom, so does CodeClan. It's just for us the best functionality. But the key is being able to share your screen and talk to people at once. Code sharing and screen sharing for teaching data science really, really is the key. And again, I just took this off Twitter. I follow lots of good people on Twitter about how if you invest in people, it will pay off. So he's saying, every single one of the interns they invested in their first year have just gone on to do amazing things. And like I said, they're often the best mentors for new people coming in, because you've trained them in such a level, they're excited, they're fresh, they're happy to give people what they got. And, the other thing he's wrote there, which I'll talk about in a second, is, it's not just the juniors that benefit from this. The people training them, the seniors, the mentors really benefit as well. And yeah, just, if you can't invest, don't expect the rewards. Don't hire a bunch of juniors and have nothing to do with them, because they'll just leave and your company will get a bad reputation for hiring people and have given them nothing to do, really. So it's better to be mindful about what you're doing before you go on. And it'll pay off so fantastically. And this brings me to the seniors, or the more, the teaching staff, I suppose, if you want to say, what's in it for them? And I've put this phrase up because I think people have heard it, is those who can do and those who can't teach. And I just know, I mean, that is one of my least favorite phrases. It is very, very difficult to teach someone that doesn't know anything. It is very difficult to teach them something. And actually it takes a real, key set of skills to be able to do that. And what I really do feel is, if you work in a more senior role, you should teach. If you manage seniors, you should schedule in time for them to teach. If you have the skills, you should pass them on, is really my feeling. And I've sort of put this slide in because, the people that do it, you probably already do it. You might not realize you do it, but you probably already do. Seniors are always answering questions for junior staff. You're always unofficially mentoring people, managing people, speaking at places, working in groups, doing code reviews. All of these are ways of teaching people. So it might not actually be too much of a stretch to say, do you know what? Yeah, I'm going to take on this and actually teach people in a more formal way. And again, here is just some benefits I see and have seen for what happens if senior staff teach. Now, the first thing is it reinforces the knowledge of seniors. There's so many times I've been teaching something that's really, to me, basic. I learned it a long time ago. I use it a lot. And someone will ask me a question about such a fundamental part of it, and it'll sort of stop me in my tracks, and I'll be like, I have no idea. I have no idea why that is. Let's go and look at it together. And I learned something, as part of that process. And it's great. It's great. It teaches them how to be mentors and managers. So some people do want to be managers. Some people just want to be mentors and keep on the technical track. But actually it gives people experience without having to take on management roles. It gives them experience that will benefit them in their career. I've put teaches them new skills in tech. There's so much stuff. Tech is constantly changing, and the people coming up, will know things that you don't. Primary school kids are coding now, so I'm assuming that, in a couple of years, people will be teaching me things. And it will refresh my skills. I learned so much from stuff that students send us. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that. That's really cool. I'll read that as well. And pays it forward. I think that's really key, is that someone taught you, and so it's good to pay it forward. There's no point gatekeeping and keeping all the information to yourself. It is really, really good. And then the sort of last ones that I put is lets the juniors see how the way seniors work. Now that maybe seems like something for the juniors, but actually, if you're programming in a certain way, or that you work in a certain way, if you can train up a team of people to work in that way for the company, it is going to make everything easier. If everyone's coding in the same way, they're using the same best practice, all that kind of stuff can be beneficial for seniors if you have to, there's less going back and checking work so carefully for some things that don't matter. You can focus on the quality assurance rather than the syntax or how they're doing it. And then it creates a strong community, because if you've got people coming into a company and they feel like they're in a space and people are teaching them, and then the people teaching them are getting something back from those juniors, it really creates this community in your company or anywhere that is going to be beneficial. People like working together. I know there's some people that don't, but it really is nice when people can share knowledge and share experiences. And I think this back and forth between sharing content and teaching things is really how you do get a community. And I've sort of put this in as the pay it forward. The difference between juniors and seniors is training and experience. Okay, the difference between current you, if you're a senior, and past you, is that you were able to make mistakes, you were able to learn from them, you moved on to other mistakes, someone taught you something. Pay it forward. It doesn't need to be this sort of idea of, well, I struggled and worked my way up, so you should as well. That doesn't benefit anyone. Juniors will seek out places and opportunities in companies that give them room to grow, and seniors will appreciate being able to give back and train the next generation. And I think if you do make an environment like that, it leads to a really strong community. And that's kind of the last thing I'll talk about. Community is really hard to come by, but it is so worth it. Okay. This is kind of the sort of closing thoughts about how you can build this community in your, classroom, office, workforce. Okay. And I do actually think that sharing and learning is kind of key as part of that. If everyone's sort of working by themselves and not having these discussions and not advancing in tech, then they're going to find somewhere that they can do it. You know, you want to build a culture where everyone can contribute, and you get that by this pairing up. If people feel comfortable, they'll ask for help. You get that by creating this environment that I've already talked about, you know, it's fine to make mistakes. I make mistakes, so you can as well. Come to me if you need help. Like that is the sort of heart of a community, right? Like helping people. And again, it says like don't have strong players dominating. Like the weak and strong need to coexist. And you know, that sort of in a business sometimes is a bit, you know, controversial. Like, well, I want all the best people, but you don't actually. You know, you don't want everyone to be a strong player, because that's not how things work. You know, the weaker people technically will be maybe the people that have a bit less experience, but they'll help each other and they'll all become strong together. And if you've got a bunch of seniors that contribute to that, you're sort of making this round workforce that can work together and will really like working together. So that's what sort of my final thoughts about why building a community through this teaching idea is really useful. And I do think it works. I think, you know, I work in a place that has a really great community. We've got a huge network of past students in all sorts of different roles that is really, really welcoming. They still come back and ask us. They get on at their jobs well. They've gone into jobs and trained other people because they had a nice experience getting trained. And I just think it's a really nice thing to try and foster everywhere we go, really. And that's me. That's what I wanted to talk about. And yeah, again, my contact details are there if you want to get in touch. But other than that, thanks very much.